But STI treatment or pregnancy prevention, any type of imaging that may be needed, especially if it's disclosed that the patient was strangled, they might need a CT of the neck, so that might be recommended as well during the forensic exam, and then follow up with any type of medical care referrals. As far as the advocate, during their examination, the advocate is there to encourage and support the survivor, and that'll be their support person throughout the examination, but then also afterwards as well. They're also there to address survivor concerns and needs, provide any type of comfort measures that the survivor may need, change of clothing, food and drink, blankets is cold in the ER. So anything that they may need, the advocate is there to support them with. And also the survivor is able to accompany, the advocate is able to accompany the survivor during the interview with law enforcement if it gets to that point. As far as benefits of the medical forensic exam, they will be cared for by trauma-informed nurses. So as I was saying earlier, forensic nurses are specially trained to give care and support survivors of this type of violence specifically. The patient will also receive education on signs and symptoms of strangulation, which is also very important as well. The forensic exam may improve and increase amount of evidence collected, strengthening criminal investigation if it gets to that point. And that documentation can also be used for civil protection order hearings, custody or divorce cases, or any type of other civil matters. The forensic exam, or with seeking help with the forensic exam, one might get referrals to advocacy and other community services. A lot of our advocacy and partner organizations offer a lot of valuable resources like mental health counseling, therapy, things of that sort, and so protective orders. So there's a lot of good resources one can gain access to with just seeking care after an assault has happened. And then lastly, a forensic exam can return control to victims or survivors and empowers them for future action and healing. The next slide is a couple pictures on here. One picture, we have the forensic nurse who is swabbing the inside of the patient's mouth. And then we also have a picture of a nurse collecting any type of findings under the patient's fingernails. And then we have a patient who has suffered an injury with bruising and swelling and abrasions on their necks. And so these are just examples of what an exam might look like in real time, but then also examples of forensic photography that could be taken during an examination. So upon finishing the exam, patient education and discharge instructions will be given, and then follow-up care. So for medication, for our sexual assault exams only, we'll offer STI treatment, not testing. We'll also offer pregnancy prophylaxis for medication, and then also the NPEP, which is the HIV non-occupational post-exposure prophylaxis medication. And then for all of our exams, IPV, sexual assault, family violence, we'll do medications for pain management, things of that sort. If they're have nausea, we'll offer medications for those types of things as well. So after the forensic examination, we will maintain, DCF&E will maintain a secure chain of custody for all evidence that is collected. In DC, if someone gets a rape kit or a physical evidence recovery kit done, and they want that process, a report has to be made to law enforcement. And so kits and toxicology for patients that report their assault are released to MPD, and then MPD will transfer those over to the Department of Forensic Sciences for toxicology collection and processing. People that get a physical evidence recovery kit done and do not report their assault at the time of the forensic examination, DCF&E will actually hold their kits for, I believe, 18 months or longer. And so we'll do check-ins just to make sure we're set on what they want to do with their kit, if they want us to still hold it, if they want to move forward with reporting and processing, if they want their evidence kit destroyed, that's also an option that they have as well. So we'll do check-ins. However, if someone does get a forensic examination done, including a physical evidence recovery kit and toxicology testing, and they do not report at the time, toxicology is still transferred over to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in the Department of Forensic Sciences, which is especially useful. A lot of people base their reporting if they were drugged or not. And so they might come back after it's been processed and their results come back and see that they were indeed drugged with something and realize, okay, I do want to, go forward with reporting, and that's fine too. And so they'll have those results readily available to them, and then they can make their decision as to what they want to do with it when they get it. The forensic nurse is also available to testify in civil and criminal proceedings after an examination as well. And then as far as the advocate, and I'm so sorry if I'm stepping on any of the content in your presentation, but the advocate will provide ongoing case management, which may include housing assistance, assistance with crime victims compensation, which essentially is a program that will potentially help patients get reimbursed for any type of expenses that they may have incurred outside of the forensic examination. And then patient advocates will be able to do referrals to mental health services or other resources that the patient may need, and then referrals for legal services as well. Sorry. Moving on to mandated reporting and consent, I thought it was important to include a couple of slides about consenting to an exam, but then also care for minors, and then our jobs as forensic nurses and making sure we're transparent about us being mandated reporters. So as far as consenting to an exam, to be able to consent for a forensic exam, a patient must be awake, they must be alert and oriented, or assenting with consent from a medical power of attorney. And so unconscious patients, we usually give them 24 hours for improvement in condition, and if there is no improvement, we can get a signed order from the physician if there is no next of kin to be able to give that consent for them, or if there is no power of attorney for the patient. So that's how that process works for consenting to an exam. And then as far as care of minors are concerned, teenagers presenting for forensic care do not have to have a parent present. So under DC law, young adults have the right to access reproductive and mental health care without the knowledge or consent of a parent. And so just reiterating kind of the age group that we service, we can serve anyone 12 and up for IPV, and then 13 and up for sexual assaults. As far as mandated reporting, medical professionals must initiate a mandated report in the following situations. If there is a physical or sexual assault of a vulnerable adult, so anyone that is unable to care for themselves, anyone with a cognitive disability, if there was an assault with a deadly weapon involved, so a knife or a gun, we're obligated to report that. If there is or was a physical or sexual assault of someone under the age of consent. And so the age of consent in DC is 16. However, we're also mandated to report if there was a physical or sexual assault of a minor under 18 that was assaulted by someone with power. So if they were assaulted by someone that's a teacher, a coach, family member, things like that, and they're under 18, that requires a mandated report. Also, if someone is more than 4 years older than the patient, if they're under 18. So if someone was in a relationship, a consenting relationship, and they're 17, but was with someone that's 23 or something, that's something that has to be mandated reporting. However, if someone was assaulted by their peers, so if there's a 16 and 17-year-old and an assault took place, that's something that does not require a report. And then lastly, if someone is at imminent risk of harming themselves, at risk for suicide or harming someone else, that requires a mandated report. And all this is transparent and laid out to the patient prior to the forensic examination happening. So some key points, takeaways that I would like the audience to remember or note is that not every patient chooses to undergo a forensic exam after an assault, and that's their right. They have the right to decline all of the forensic services, but they can still have access and access to resources, referrals, and support that all of these people that you saw that are the DC sexual assault response team that offer their services, they still have access to those, even if they decline a forensic exam altogether. Patients may, again, accept or decline any portion of the exam. They may withdraw consent at any time, which is why we make it a point to have ongoing consent throughout the forensic examination, because someone may be okay with something at one point and then when we get to it may not be okay with it. So we'll try to get consent throughout the whole process. The exam cannot confirm definitively that someone was or was not assaulted. Our jobs as forensic nurses is to essentially provide care and support for the patient, as we call them, or the survivor, and then whatever happens afterwards, but we cannot confirm or deny that someone was or was not assaulted. And then evidence and toxicology is processed within 90 days. And so DC is one of the districts that's fortunate enough to have laws in where there is no backlog of rape kits in DC. And so rape kits and toxicology have to be processed within 90 days. So what we can accomplish as forensic nurses or the forensic examination can give patients a sense of control and bodily autonomy. Again, getting consent, making sure that they have the power over their options and their examination, how that goes. We can screen for life-threatening injuries. And then a forensic exam, although not immediately, will be able to tell a patient if they were drugged within 90 days. And then a forensic exam cannot test a patient to see if they were assaulted. A forensic exam cannot tell a patient if they were exposed to an STI, which is why we offer treatment, not testing. And then a forensic examination also cannot guarantee identification, arrest, or conviction of the person that committed the assault. As far as accessing services, there are 4 ways technically that we tell people to access our services. The main 2 ways that we stress is to walk into MedStar Washington Hospital Center's emergency department. As I stated earlier, services are available there 24/7, 365 days a year. The ED staff at MedStar is trained to know what to do if someone were to come to the hospital and present and need a forensic examination. Another way that we love to stress is calling the DC Victim Hotline. So if you don't take anything away from this presentation, I always tell people just to write that number down. It is a very resourceful tool available to everyone all victims of crime, and a lot of the organizations that we partner with and that are a part of that SART can be accessed through the DC Victim Hotline as well. So those are the main two ways we stress. Another way that I kind of hinted on earlier in the presentation is if someone were to walk into another DC hospital's ED and need a forensic examination, they can go through that as well. We've also trained all of the emergency departments in DC to know what to do and how to initiate that transfer process if someone were to come to their hospital and need a forensic examination. So that's also a way to access our services. And then lastly, you can call MPD. We have a relationship with their sexual assault unit, and so they also know when coming into contact with someone that may have experienced this type of violence to know what to do and where to take them, essentially, if that were the case. You can skip this next slide because it's a video, but just concluding with important contact information. If you have any questions, I'm sure we're taking questions at the end of this presentation, but if you think of anything that you may have questions on or just want me to expand more on some of the content that was in the presentation, feel free to email me, ryla@dcfne.org. That is our organization's general email. contact@dcfne.org is another way to get in touch with us. And then again, just stressing and reiterating the DC Victim Hotline number. Cannot stress enough how much of a tool that is for all residents in DC. So thank you, guys. Oh, do I have a bio for her? Oh, I introduced them earlier. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryla. Let's give her another hand. I asked her, I said, okay, so how much of this is actually like Law and Order? Because that's all we know. We've been watching that for 25 years. So as we can see, there's so much more to it than what has been depicted on that show. So great information for us. And again, it was a lot of information. That's why we're recording it so that you can go back and watch it, and you can also share it with your congregations as well. All right, so our next speaker is Robert Platt. He has been a DMV resident for 2 decades. In 2019, he joined the USAO-DC, United States Attorney's Office, to try and give back to the community he calls home. For the past 3 years, Rob has been a senior AUSA in the Felony Sex Offense Unit of the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. Let's give him a hand as he comes forward.
Thank you, Dr. Struthers. So as Dr. Struthers indicated, Robert Platt from the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. And for the Law and Order SVU fans out there, I am like Dominic Carisi. So that is that's the analog there. As my colleague Lenny mentioned at the beginning, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. is unlike any other U.S. Attorney's Office in that we prosecute both federal crime and local crime. And so the local crime is all handled by the Superior Court Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office, where there are a bunch of different sections, and I have been fortunate for most of my 6 years in the office to have spent them in the sex offense and domestic violence section of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I began my time, as many do, in the misdemeanor portion of the rotation, and I was doing domestic violence misdemeanor cases. I then transitioned over to, we have a small little section that handles misdemeanor sex assaults or sex offenses. Might be thinking, how on earth could there be a misdemeanor sex offense? And this is sort of those crimes that it's butt grabs or breast grabs on the metro, stuff like that. And then from there, I rotated through a couple of other sections in the office and tried my darndest to get back to SODV, and spent some time in our domestic violence felony section, which handles kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's felonies between parties that have an interpersonal relationship, and so I spent some time there before moving over to the sex offense division, where I now focus my time on prosecuting felony sex offenses with both child and adult victims, and so these are oftentimes sort of more what you think of as the traditional rapes, and the range of conduct can vary rather significantly, and I will spare everybody all of the nitty-gritty details of what those often consider. What I will note and start with is that by the time the U.S. Attorney's Office gets involved in a case, there have been many other stakeholders and fabulous counterparts throughout the city that have already been involved, starting oftentimes with Metropolitan Police Department or DCFNE, where we have survivors that are courageous enough to come forward. Usually in those instances, they'll come forward immediately after or within 120 hours of having experienced a sexual assault. And in those instances, we are brought in only after MPD has themselves or another law enforcement partner has gotten involved. So I think that's an important piece to the whole puzzle. Is the U.S. Attorney's Office never themselves intakes a report. It always goes through one of our law enforcement partners. And so for clergy or anybody who is the recipient of information that they think warrants being passed along, the U.S. Attorney's Office is not. We are a few steps into that process. So it's almost universally going to be coming from the Metropolitan Police Department or one of our other law enforcement partners through the various through the various sort of channels that Ryla had discussed before. The other way that cases come to us, when it's not through DCFNE, is oftentimes, in those situations, it usually means that there's been either a recent incident or ongoing trauma that somebody has been experiencing, which they've then brought to the attention of either a mandated reporter or law enforcement or DCFNE or the DCFNE counterpart over at Children's National, CAPC, which is the Children and Adolescent Protection Center, I believe. And so in those instances, there's sort of an ongoing violence or abuse that has been happening, which is what warrants going and having the evaluations done. Other ways and other types of investigations that we often undertake in prosecutions are what we would call something that's the result of a delayed disclosure. And so this is probably a fair amount of what I would imagine clergy often or members of the community are confronted with, which is that somebody experienced an abuse either as a child or maybe as an adult that they've been holding on to for a very, very long time, trying to figure out when would be the appropriate time to bring it up, how would it be appropriate for them to bring it up, and to basically summon the courage and the willpower to do it. And so when we get those cases, oftentimes something had happened years prior, and so those present different challenges for us as a U.S. Attorney's Office, right, as a prosecutors, because we have to always be thinking, how are we going to be able to prove this particular case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury where I don't have the benefit of perhaps an immediate report to the police department and forensic evidence that's collected during a SANE exam, but that does not mean that we don't go forward with those prosecutions. We do them all of the time, and there's something that we are very comfortable investigating and pursuing day in and day out. So I think there's a couple of things that I think are important for this particular audience to draw on, and it's sort of the caveat to that thread, which is if somebody does come to you and has expressed that they were the victim of this type of sexual abuse, or they are in a intimate partner violence type situation, I think that the most important thing is to ensure that you give that individual a voice, that you are empowering them. For somebody to have experienced what they have and to, as I said, summon the courage to come forward with those, to come forward and express that to you means that they trust you, and they've chosen you as somebody that they want to bring this to. And I think that oftentimes the instinct can be for somebody that receives this information, maybe it's in a family or in a congregation, to see and try and figure out if we can maybe handle this in-house, right? And I think that what that can do, though, sometimes is pose problems, because there are often actors and there are often people involved in that trauma that you may not know about, or that person may not be telling you, because they're only giving you, one piece of that story, because that's all they're comfortable talking about. Now, there may be kids that are still in the home. There may be other people who have experienced similar abuse and haven't yet summoned the courage. And so it's imperative, I think, that you give them the voice, that you empower them to make the decisions, to come forward and try and seek justice and accountability for what has happened to them. And so I think the follow-on to that is, I think oftentimes the U.S. Attorney's Office is perceived as having sort of only one tool at its disposal, right? The surgeons do surgery, and AUSA's prosecutors throw people in jail. And I think that that's a bit of a misnomer, assessment of what we are often after, right? Sometimes there's more to it than just trying to get somebody convicted and then lock them up and throw away the key. We recognize that there's a lot more going on, and so our goal and our intention is to always do what we believe is right, what's going to be right by the victim, what's going to be right by the community, and also what's going to be right by the individual that we're prosecuting, who we're hoping that on the other end of this will become a productive member of the community. And so that oftentimes can mean ensuring that they're getting the rehabilitative support that they need, while we are also ensuring that our victims and the other members of our community are safe. And so the last thing I would say is, I think as has been indicated, I'm sure we will hear from Valare too, that our victims throughout the process, one thing that we strive, and I admit we don't always 100% meet the mark, but we do try very much at the U.S. Attorney's Office to involve our victims in the process and empower them as well every step of the way. There's the Crime Victim Rights Act in DC, which gives our victims certain different rights, to whether it be knowing about upcoming hearings, whether there be potential changes in the release conditions of a defendant, and to basically confer with us throughout the process. And so one thing that is critical to me and my colleagues is that we are involving our victims to making sure that the decisions that we are making are taking into account what the victim believes is going to be best for them as well. And so it's not always dispositive of what we will do, and we're clear to measure our expectations and try and keep everybody informed at the very least of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why we believe that based on all the information we have, it's going to be what's best for the community. And so I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak with everybody here today. I think there'll be some time for specific questions at the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really liked that U.S. Assistant Attorney talked about how they really go through the process of rehabilitating not just the victim, but also the perpetrator as well. And since that's what we as the church is all about, I really do appreciate that, because normally when we hear about these types of cases, they have gone really bad, where someone has been, murdered, or the children have just been so victimized. But it is good to hear that the majority of the cases that they do provide rehabilitation. So that's good. And to our clergy, You know, this is what we want to have these types of conversations in our congregation. You want to make sure that it's open conversation, that your congregants know that they can come to you as a leader, that they will be safe to share something as, you know, traumatic as that experience, that they receive the love and the care, and that they are directed in the right place. Because just because we may have titles does not mean that we know how to deal with those kinds of situations. I'm so glad that one of my professors made me write a 25-page paper on domestic violence. So I did all kind of research on that. So, you know, prior to that, I really did not have much knowledge. That 25-page paper gave it to me, though. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much. And our last speaker is Benny Del Castillo, who I thought was a gentleman, but you're very beautiful. You're a very beautiful woman. She is a Latinx, how you say that, girl? Okay, Latinx, okay. She's also an immigrant and Spanish-speaking woman living in Washington, D.C. She began her advocacy in the field of power-based violence as a college undergrad by performing in an improv group educating fellow peers on sexual violence prevention. And that was at the Screen Theater. She then worked as a bilingual case manager in a domestic violence safe house in New Jersey before moving to DC in 2014 to work at Valere as a bilingual advocate. In this role, Benny responded to the hospital, providing support for sexual assault survivors and providing case management to all crime victims, such as domestic violence and homicide survivors. Benny has also worked in the fields of prevention, facilitating trainings throughout the community, focusing on child sexual abuse. She then obtained her LICSW and is a practicing trauma therapist, primarily working with sexual assault survivors. Benny is now the engagement manager at Valere. She obtained her bachelor's degree in women and gender studies from Rutgers University and her master's in social work from the University of Maryland in Baltimore. So let's give her a hand as she comes forward.
Awesome. Hi, everyone, and hi, folks online. There it is. Online. Thank you, Dr. Struthers. So what a welcome. I think both of these folks already mentioned me, but like they said, my name is Benny, and I work at Valere. We were more commonly known as Network for Victim Recovery, or NVRDC. We just rebranded in January, so it's still kind of new. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our services. I know we're behind on time, but I think in the panel we'll discuss more questions and get into the topic. So I wanted to share us as a resource. So one thing about Valere is we provide free trauma-informed services to all crime victims. So sexual assault, absolutely, domestic violence, stalking, hate crimes, elder abuse, gun violence, surviving members of homicide. So really anything that falls under the legal definition of a crime, we provide those services for free in the District of Columbia. The other thing I want to say is we support all survivors. When I say that, Dr. Struthers, I appreciate you all encouraging us to not think of people in binaries of there's people who cause harm and there's people who experience harm. We all have the capacity to do both. So we support all survivors. So for example, we support, as the nurses, we respond to folks who are incarcerated, right? Because they can also be survivors. So I really appreciate that as a reminder for everyone. I'm gonna go through our services kind of quickly. one that Ryla spoke about in detail is the Sexual Assault Crisis Response Program. So we are not represented in SVU. Advocates are not represented, which is a thing I have a problem with. But we're actually ones that develop a really strong relationship often with survivors because we do a follow-up after. We're there. I've had the privilege to meet survivors probably after one of the worst moments of their lives. And I've also worked with them sometimes years after. Sometimes I don't see them ever again, right? So that's one of our programs. I will say the other part of that program that we're part of is community response. So we respond to the hospital. However, if someone decides to make a police report, we'll report to the scene, which could be where it happened, like a bar or restaurant. It could be their apartment, right? It could be, let's say they're talking to clergy, it could be there. So that really increases access. So they don't have to go to Washington Hospital Center if that's not what they're choosing to do at that moment. We also provide free legal services, free advocacy and case management. We also have a small but growing restorative justice program. We offer free therapeutic services in-house. And all of that's intentional because that means a survivor could, in one organization, get advocacy, legal, have their therapist, and all those people are conversing to best support that person, right? And then doing this, outreach and education, which to me is really, really important work. One, because it encourages the community to know these resources so that people can access them if they need them. Two, I believe education is power. So I do believe that through education, we can end sexual violence. We can end all violence by that community support and community effort, right? I'm not gonna go, because I have brochures so folks can take into too much detail about each service, but I will say they're all free. We start at age 13. And you might have heard that age, right, from Ryla. That's intentional because that means it all matches up. So folks can access some medical services, right, at 13 without parental consent. Same for us. They could technically access services without parental consent. So I do want to mention that starting at 13 up. The other unique thing about us is there is no minimum or maximum of what you need to make to access our services. A lot of nonprofits, you need to be like at the poverty line to access services. So no one can make too little or too much. That's really important when we're thinking about domestic violence. And if you have a partner who makes a lot of money and you have to report that income, or if you're a college student, for example, and you have to maybe report your parents' income. So it's breaking down barriers that way. The very last thing I'll mention about Volare is we believe in survivor-defined justice. And I want to mention that because I think it'll resonate a lot with you all, with clergy specifically. When I say survivor-defined justice, I'm talking about the concept that only that person knows what is best for them. Only they can tell us what they want to do, what they don't want to do. Right? And so sometimes out of our human, literally goodness and care and love, when someone tells us something that they've gone through that is awful, that is sad, our love and care as a human, we want to do something. We want to somehow like, how can I fix this? Right? That is human nature and it comes truly from a wonderful place. And that may not be what they need. Right? We might think, oh, you really need to report. This is how you're going to be safe. You really need to go to the hospital. That's how you're going to be safe. You really need to leave that relationship. That's how you're going to be safe. And they may not be there. And, right, the power of us respecting that decision is then when they are ready, if they're ready, they will trust us to also be there and support them in that step, right? So when we say survivor-defined justice, we mean there is no right or wrong way to react, to feel, or to cope after experiencing harm. And only that person can tell what their justice looks like. I've worked with many, many survivors, and for example, at the hospital, I would have folks come and tell me, I'm gonna report to the police, I know that, that's what I want to do. And I'd be like, great, this is how I can support you in your goals. I've also had other folks say, I just want to get medication and I'm going to leave and I'm going to forget this ever happened to me. Great, this is how I can support you in those goals. And I've had people come in and say, I need a safe place to sleep tonight. That is my justice. That's what my justice looks like. Like, great. This is how we can support you, right? So I will leave you with that, and I'm sure we're going to get into further topics on the panel. But I do have brochures for folks at the end, and thank you all so much for staying tuned through, with us.
Yes, as leaders, the main thing that we want to do is to remove the stigmatization that and the shame that comes along with these types of violences. And so we want to have atmospheres that are safe. We're going to get into talking about some things that we could do as spiritual leaders so that when they come into our sanctuaries, maybe we even have members of our own family that have gone through these things. You mentioned incarceration. I mean, there's a big stigmatization that surrounds those who, are returning citizens. Many of them have a very difficult time reintegrating back into society. So we can facilitate that by our compassion, the love of Jesus Christ. And that is one thing that I do want to say. I want our speakers to be on their way to the stage so that we can do Q&A. But we want to have members coming from all religions. We are not afraid. I don't have a problem with, standing shoulder to shoulder with a Muslim. You can talk about Allah, but you can best believe that I'm going to be talking about Jesus. So don't have a problem with all of that, with us coming together. Why? Because these types of violences affect everybody within our community. So we can't, it affects black people, white people, Hispanics, all of us. And so we want clergy to come from everywhere. And whether you're a Muslim, you're a Catholic, it doesn't matter. We want to come together, and we're going to continue to have these conversations so that we can be a better to support to our members and to our individual communities. All right, I'm going to move over. Now, if you guys have any questions, you may come to the mic, but just in case, because we know that some of you get question shy. And, you have a lot of questions afterwards, but we need for you to have some questions right now. I also want to let you guys know that we have two more members from our pastoral team. We have Pastor Andy and Lady Chris, and we also have Pastor Stanley. Let's thank them for coming out and supporting. Glad that they are here because, they're frontline. So this information is, beneficial to all of us as well. All right, so my first question, they gave me questions specifically for you guys. You can grab the mic, but it's to AUSA Robert. And the first question is, does sexual assault only happen between strangers, or can it also involve people the survivor knows, like friends, family, or members of the faith community?
Sure, that's a great question. This mic is on, confirming. So I think that the sort of misconception of the boogeyman in a big white van offering people candy is just that. It is a misconception. More often than not, and we have experts often who testify to this at trial, the person who is the abuser is somebody that is in the survivor, the victim's inner circle, mm-hmm. and they're usually exploiting the position of trust or authority that they have in that relationship to gain access to the victim. And I think the more obvious situation that we're confronting sometimes too is in relationships. There are certainly intimate partner violence is certainly very prevalent and something that our office deals with on a regular basis. And so while there are Certainly stranger rapes, and I have a number of those that I've prosecuted and will continue to do. The vast majority have a relationship between the victim and the abuser.
Okay, very good. So true. Okay, next question is to Benny. What guidance would you offer to someone who has been sexually assaulted and is afraid to disclose it to the police for fear of retaliation?
I would say that's okay. And it's kind of tied to what I was telling you all, right? Our role, and I still say our role as if I was still an advocate, but that is still always my lens, is that survivors will know what is best for them. Mm-hmm. Especially, and you were mentioning safety, right? Like intention, fear of safety for retaliation. Who am I to tell someone what's going to be safe or not? Mm. We can provide safety planning, and we can talk about, hey, you just mentioned safety, like let's talk about that because I want to make sure you feel okay, like in your home. What are some things we can do? But I always want to encourage us, like, the empowerment, and I think you said the word empowerment before, the empowerment is for what they want to do. Now, if they wanted to report and then they have that fear, that's a further conversation of, like, if that's something you really want to do, that's what's going to be your version of justice or accountability or safety, then yes, there is a way to do that. There is various programs offered both through MPD, USAO, and safety planning we can do. But I would really encourage all of us who do have the power, because we do as community members, to support survivors means respecting when they're telling us that's not something they feel comfortable doing for whatever reason, safety or otherwise.
Very good, very good. Yes, it's really up to them that we not force them. Like we see on SVU, Olivia Benson is always talking the victim into, going to court, reporting it, getting, the rape kit, the whole thing. But it's good to hear it's not like that you leave it totally up to them. Okay, Ryla. How can religious leaders responsibly and effectively support survivors and address claims of sexual abuse and misconduct?
Yes, great question. There's 3 things I want to hit on with that. The first is to listen and believe survivors. So be compassionate, as Benny stated in her presentation. This is oftentimes the most vulnerable people will get. This is oftentimes the worst time of their life. So being compassionate, not displaying any type of skepticism, avoiding victim blaming, asking questions like, well, what were you wearing? Or were you drinking? Things like that can be or come across as victim blaming. So avoiding things like that, validating their experience without minimizing their credibility, I think is a big one. As far as the second point, I kind of touched on this in my presentation, but it's important not to re-traumatize their survivors. So avoid asking them to repeat their story constantly, bringing up that trauma, asking them why repeatedly, why, that can also re-traumatize the survivor. So making sure not to do those things. And then lastly, language matters, so language can support healing, reduce shame, create safety, and so saying things like, I'm sorry that happened to you, making sure that they know that you're here to support them. Now that we've learned all of these things throughout all of our presentations, you can even say you may benefit from speaking to a professional that can help you further, or you may benefit from speaking to a forensic nurse. So letting them know that they have options, but also validating their concerns. Respecting their autonomy, we talked about this a little bit as well, but letting them know that they're in control of what happens next. Whatever they want to do, they're in control over that. So not forcing them to report, things like that is also important. And then lastly, when we're talking about language, kind of mimicking what they say. More often than not, people that experience this type of violence like to be referred to as survivor. So if they want to be referred to as survivor, say survivor. If they refer to themselves as a victim, then it's okay to mimic that language as well. But I think that's important.
Oh, very good. Very good. Love that. Okay, one more for you, Ryla. What barriers keep sexual assault victims from coming forward?
Yeah, well, you kind of said one of them in your question to Benny, fear of retaliation, fear of not being believed, fear of, just law enforcement in general, just fear of, talking to, interacting with police, survivor shame or guilt, them feeling like what happened to them is their fault. More often than not, the person that committed this assault or crime to them is someone that they know. So it might be a coworker, it might be kind of the hints that I was talking about in my presentation, coworker, family member, coach, a religious leader, etc. So it might be fear of, getting that person in trouble or coming across that person while they're going through their situation. Couple things might be accessibility, for simply just not knowing about available resources to them. So also, as Betty was saying, just education is power. So just not being educated or as far as like the resources available to them. And then lastly, I kind of hit on this on the last question as well, but just victim blaming, but just fear of making them seem like what happened to them is their fault.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I found in my research, which really shocked me, was that in terms of sex trafficking, a person, a survivor, can be complicit and still be exploited. So even though they were a willing participant, it does not remove the fact that they have been exploited, they have been frauded, or they have been coerced in some kind of way. So these are things for us to keep within our thinking, because it is our nature to ask questions like, why? Why were you there? Did you not? Why did you do that at 2 o'clock in the morning? So those kinds of things that we will have to use wisdom if we really want to provide them the help that they need. All right, and last question for you, Robert, is, are there legal obligations clergy and religious institutions have when they become aware of sexual assault? And are there consequences for failing to report?
So you may be surprised to learn that while there are mandated reporters, clergy is not one of them. So there's no legal obligations to do that or legal consequences. But I think for all of the reasons that we've talked about today, empowering our victims and giving them a voice and whatever it is that they are going through is an important thing to do. So even absent legal obligations, just encourage everybody to be the empowering force that you all can be.
Great. Okay, yes ma'am. If you have a question, would you mind coming to the mic so that it can be on YouTube? And if anybody else has a question, you could come and line up over here. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, good. I had a couple questions, but the first one was, do you ever go forward, like the U.S. Attorney, do you ever go forward without the victim? Like, because I know in some states, like the DA could just go and say, look, I got it. The victim doesn't want anything to do with this, but we're still going to go forward with this case.
So every case is unique and presents its own unique set of facts and circumstances, and so I think that is, each one is sort of evaluated on its own, and whether or not we would believe that we could, that would be one factor that we would take into consideration. But I think oftentimes portrayed on TV is this question of whether or not, like, do you want to press charges, and that is not something that occurs in the District of Columbia. So the victim doesn't need themselves to say, oh yes, I would like to press charges in this for for the U.S. Attorney's Office to initiate a case.
Got it. Thank you. And then my second question was for the restorative justice at Volare. Would you mind talking just a little bit more about that? Thanks.
Yes, it's one of my favorites, of course. So kind of, I think it's tied to our view of like what justice is, which means it can only be defined by the survivor, right? So restorative justice is one option. The legal system, the carceral system, for some, that they can define that as justice. For a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, they do not trust any systems, including the legal system, for historical reasons, for harm committed against them, for generational trauma, right? They don't maybe ethically or morally believe in incarceration. That's what we hear a lot often. For example, I've worked with survivors actually at the hospital. I was with a nurse who also heard this, where someone's like, I'm not going to be responsible for putting another black man in prison. And so we think about the impact of racism on that person's decision, right? So, variety of reasons. This program looks at accountability differently. So often when people think of accountability, they think, oh, that means you go to jail or you go to prison. And it's a very limited view of accountability, right? So restorative justice most commonly is thought of as like healing circles. It could be conversations, because some of the most like stated questions from survivors is like, why did this person do this to me? Why did this happen? Why did they choose to do that? Especially if there's an established relationship, why? Most of the time they do want to have a conversation and understand. So we have facilitated healing circles to facilitate those conversations. It could also be any other type of question, and it also connects community, right? So it doesn't other. It helps in facilitation of, you are still part of community, so how do we get you back in here instead of like pushing you out, right? Because that, for a lot of people, is not the goal. We want to feel safe. We want to build strong, safe communities, which includes everyone, right? So some other examples, what we've done, and it's not only limited to sexual assault, we did what's called, we partnered with Free Minds, an amazing organization, where we called it surrogates. So for restorative justice to work, to even have a conversation, both parties need to consent. It does not work if both parties don't consent. So we partnered with them because we had some clients, for example, we had caregivers of someone, their son was murdered, right? So that family wanted to engage in restorative justice, have a conversation. But the person who caused that harm was not consenting, which is their right. And then Free Minds had a connection with someone who was incarcerated because of the crime of murder, right? And so they were paired up to have probably what I would think is probably one of the most powerful conversations to ever be had. And so they both got to experience that, even though if it wasn't the exact same person involved in that crime. Our restorative justice facilitator has also had conversations, for example, within a family of, we had a survivor of gun violence who, due to that gun violence, was in a wheelchair. And he wanted to have a conversation with his own family of, you're expecting me to be the same person, and I'm not the same person. I'm a different person because of this, right? This is how trauma has impacted me. So we facilitated that conversation. So it can look differently, but all of it centered on that consent, connection, community.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Come on.
Two questions. One for, I would just start with, can you say your name again in the middle? From Volare? Ben, when I hear like that statement, just if someone's a victim, and I know someone who was a victim, that I don't want to put someone else in jail. On the other side, she didn't go through restorative justice. She just dealt with the trauma. She stayed, and it impacted everything else for a very long time. How does it play out for people who are thinking about protection? And it could be a fear-based response, but it's not, but yet the perpetrator is just out and about and can hurt other people. I mean, that's just an open-ended thought. That's not really a question.
I think that's an important thought, and tell me if I misunderstood. I think the thought or the question was, well, if this person doesn't report, the person who caused harm is out there potentially causing harm to others. Is that kind of what? Yeah. And here's what a lot of people have said this, have thought this. I may have even thought this when I was younger before I got into the field, is who are we putting the pressure on in that situation? Who are we putting the blame to? The survivor, right? Yeah. We're saying, you didn't report. So if anything happens, even if that's not our words, right? That's kind of how our brain is working, which is part of rape culture, right? Because we have a culture in our society that always wants to be like, no, it's your responsibility, it's your responsibility, it's your responsibility. Which is a protective factor because we don't ever want to think that this could happen to us. We don't ever want to believe, because it's scary. Some people would not leave their home if they truly sat with the fact that we have zero control over this happening to us, because it's really scary, right? Versus what we promote is, it's actually on all of us. So it may not be on a survivor that they don't want to report, but how about that person's friend who hears them talking and making rape jokes, who knows what they did and has said nothing, right? What about caregivers who are raising children, right? What about no sex education in schools so people don't know about what consent is, right? So really looking at our entire society and finding what's my role, right? Versus only this one person. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, that was just a thought. Now, my next question, I'm sorry, for DC's Carisi, your name?
I'm Rob.
Okay, I like that we have DC's Carisi, so, when you talked about the rehabilitation, you talked about 3 points, like the victim, the community, and then also the perpetrator and rehabilitation. What does rehabilitation look like from your office? Is it programs? Is it worked into the justice process?
Sure, so I don't mean to suggest that the U.S. Attorney's Office is the rehabilitative force, because we are not. But I think one of the things that we are thinking of when we are, cases can resolve in a number of different ways once they're initiated. We could either decide that we're not going to go forward anymore and the case is dismissed. More often than not, though, we are looking for a defendant to accept responsibility for what's happened, or we're going to go to trial and we're going to try and prove their guilt there. And if somebody either pleads guilty or goes to trial, part of the sentence that we would ask for at allocution oftentimes is going to include some type of rehabilitative services. So, for example, if somebody, we know that our defendant was dual diagnosis, having both mental health and substance abuse issues, then we're going to encourage the CSOSR that's the organization that will handle the supervision of their upon their release. We're going to ask that they have to be evaluated and then participate in services that are going to address those issues. Certainly, for sex offense cases, we're going to ask that they undergo a sexual assault, a sex offender evaluation, and treatment to give them the faculties to address whatever the underlying causes of the abuse were, right? What led them to those things. Doesn't benefit anybody to, lock somebody up for 5 years and then send them back out in the community without any of the resources to address the underlying conditions. And so sometimes it can also be, it can be trying to encourage them or making a condition of their release that they seek or try and obtain employment, right? And also conscious of the fact that we're trying not to overburden somebody either, right? Like if you don't want to create an environment where we're gonna, they're gonna be destined to fail, because that's also not beneficial. So I think, we are trying to be as thoughtful as we can, understanding that we are one sort of piece in this larger puzzle that, needs to sort of come together in order to address all of these underlying issues.
And just one follow-up question. Are there programs in DC that deal with people who have committed assault? Like that, I had never heard of that before. That they can think through, like you said, what I did, why I did it, what happened, their experience. I didn't know there were any programs like that or any organizations that do that.
So through CSOSA, there's a number of programs that will, these are for people who have already gone through, had their offenses adjudicated.
Okay.
And yes, there's certainly programs that are offered. There are facilities within BOP that actually offer the treatment you can initiate those courses while you are still detained. That's not universal, but there are certain locations, and so sometimes our defendants will be moved or asked to be transported to those locations so they can start the work while they're still incarcerated.
And I would also like to say we also have churches, ministries who do provide support to perpetrators, those who have committed a crime, as well as the victims. One of the models that we have is Healing Communities, where we provide care, rehabilitation care to both sides. You have a question? Okay, Pastor Andy.
Yeah, how you doing? My question is for the district attorney office. I'm a sworn chaplain for the state of Maryland. I do some counseling and stuff. I'm here in DC. This is our church. Question, I have a little concern about the victim and the advocacy that you spoke about from the clergy point of view. When you say the obligation to report is not ours, but if someone comes to me and make a report to me, if I don't report it, justice and all that other stuff are good. And I think what you're doing is good for some people. But when we talk about clergy, and this for the district attorney, so I get a report on rape. I say, okay, well, you don't want to report them, I'm not gonna report them, or whatever case may be. This person, victim, a year down the road says, no, I changed my mind. I want this person locked up. I went to my pastor and I told my pastor neglected to report it to the authority. And I understand what you're saying, because you're saying district attorney's not gonna deal with it until it goes through MPD and goes through those, and the district attorney looks it over and see if they have a case to go after. But for the clergy point of view, Mr. District Attorney, do I still have the responsibility to report any crime that is reported to me as a clergy, or have the ability or the right to ignore it, counting on somebody doing justice for whatever?
Sure, it's a good question. So just one point of clarification, there is a DC Attorney General's office, which so I am part of the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's a separate DC AG. Okay. So, and in terms of I'm like a little bit of a one-trick pony in that I know DC specific stuff, so I have no idea. Maryland is a whole different can of worms, and I cannot purport to know what would happen there. And all I'm speaking about when I was addressing that particular question is with regard to sexual assault. I was sort of responding to, there's this code about who are mandated reporters, and it specifically defines who those people are, and it outlines teachers, medical providers, CFSA employees, and the list goes on. Clergy is not included on that list. The other thing too about that is as I recall, and again, I'm not an expert on this. It doesn't come up as often as you might think, but it's usually with regard to child sexual abuse. And so, and so that doesn't mean that if you learn of child sexual abuse for a mandated reporter that occurred 10 years ago, I think you're still supposed to report it as a mandated reporter. But if you learn of a sexual assault against an adult, and I will defer to Ryla on this, that is why DCF&E can learn of a adult victim, and then they won't turn over the kid to MPD because they're not. There's no mandated reporter requirements for them either. So I hope that somewhat addresses your question. I don't know whether or not I don't think you're legally. I guess the long and short is that if you have a
because the Constitution is what holds our power as clergy. The difference between the separation between church and state. I still have an obligation, and with that obligation, I am familiar with DC. I served as a campus police for years for Howard University. I actually did investigation on sexual assaults and things like that. And I know DC, I don't know whether they change or whether there's a must arrest in domestic violence cases and things like that. So if I learn of domestic violence and it happened and I go talk to DC and DC pursues it, and they pick it up, and they, like, first course, they want to know what I said. So now I'm valuable as a clergy. I'm not going to get into, how y'all place your importance on us. But then at the same time, if I don't, and that same process happened with that same person within a year or so, and they come back and state that I knew and had knowledge of it and did not report it, then they're coming after me. Unless laws have changed and somehow the Constitution has changed.
So I do, and you can speak more to this, I do want to clarify when I do think it's different when it's a child and we're talking about mandated reporting, especially, and I'm just going to name it, right? Like the cases of where children who are now adults are saying, hey, I was abused by a clergy member, and I said this, right? So that to me is like separate than what you were asking. But I will say there's also a difference between your response being, oh, you don't want to report, right? Versus, hey, thanks for telling me. Can I share some resources with you? And then you make the decision of what you want to do. I think they're very different responses there.
I do understand that, but I'm not talking about negligent clergy. So I'm not talking about clergymen who have committed the act. That's not it. That's totally different. I think they should be locked up too and treated like everybody else. I'm talking about responsible clergymen who take the Constitution and everything seriously, and we have an obligation as a clergyman to report if someone reports to us, because if we're liable if we do not, and I've seen it happen.
So I'll just say, and I think this is getting a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, I think whether there's civil or criminal liability may be two distinctions. As far as I'm aware, if somebody came to you to report that they were the victim of an offense of any kind, right, whether it be domestic violence or a robbery, and you said nothing about it, and then a year later they came back and something had happened again, somebody may come and ask you, did they report, right? Like, and look at you a little bit askew for not having said something, right? Like, I mean, that's conceivable. But oftentimes we will have, we have, in the law, there's a report of rape, exception to certain evidence that can come in. And oftentimes this will be, somebody who maybe told a friend shortly after something happened, but then waited years to disclose it to law enforcement. And so there's situations where that person is allowed, that friend is allowed to testify to basically say, well, this person reacted as one would have expected them to react back in the day. Just took a little while for the case to, for them to either come up with the courage. So to express what had happened and for the case to start. So I think, whether or not maybe there'd be a civil question, that I don't know. Like I said, one trick pony here. But, I don't think that I am unaware of a situation where a clergy member was then themselves prosecuted because they knew of something and didn't say, they knew of a robbery or domestic violence situation that didn't say anything. And so that, I hope, addresses a little bit, but yeah.
I was just going to say, if you want me to...
Yes.
So I was just going to add that, you also have the priest penitent privilege, and when you're talking about clergy, the gentleman go, okay. And you also have the priest penitent privilege when you're talking about clergy, and you may have a responsibility to keep that to yourself if that person asks you to. So then it would be kind of strange if they then came back after you, and then that would be a different situation that I don't know the answer to. But there is also that element.
Yeah, but I do know cases that have said that clergy are not held accountable, such as even priests are really not held accountable. So you can't say that I can't follow privilege for information that I have.
Oh, sure. I'm saying you may have a responsibility though to keep that to yourself if that person, because of that, they may be coming to you because, you know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. Like that survivor may be coming to you because they don't want, they need somebody safe to talk to, and they don't want it to to come out. I mean, it's just a different side of it. That's all.
It sounds good, but in society, including what happened in Maryland, where the lady reported that she was being abused by her husband, the clergy failed to act. He didn't know about it, but the husband came back and shot the woman. It just didn't get back to the clergy as bad because the police also knew. So they dealt with that from the case, but there are those instances. I understand what you're saying. I just don't quite grab the advocacy for privacy for crime. I understand victims, and I understand that, but I just don't understand the advocacy for crime that are considered crimes being covered or not happening.
I understood.
Okay, awesome. Yes, go ahead. This is great. They're talking.
As I'm listening to the discussion, what I hear is society's response and other people's response. And where it was Me Too and then Church Too, and there were so many cases that came out where people said, I talked to this person and they didn't say anything. And so there were so many documented cases, and it makes me wonder, is there some other, I'm not clergy, is there some other accountability in terms of the bodies that you belong to that say, I have a moral responsibility of how I act as a clergy in this space? Because community members, society comes back and says, oh, they're covering it up. And so that's the blowback that I'm hearing that.
Yes. And I think that is the point that Pastor Stanley, Andy, is making. But I was taught that clergy are not held responsible. If the individual, if they're coming to share it, and they say that they don't want it reported, that removes that clergy member from any kind of, if we're talking about priests, they already have something in place to deal with the fact that they're not going to share it. Everything is held privately, and that's just the way that they do ministry. But great conversations. You want to add to that?
I'll just add quick, and I just want to clarify, from working with survivors who are very involved in their faith communities, and I'm not exaggerating when I say some survivors have told me I would not be alive if it wasn't for my faith community, right? I want to recognize the power that any member of the church has, clergy, whatever your role is. And from the feedback I've gotten, the issue I've seen is not so much, oh, you didn't report, it's how they responded to the survivor. Did they blame them? Did they say, oh, well, you can't get divorced, this is something you just have to keep enduring? Oh, this was God's will. I'm not saying any of you would say that, but that's literally what I've heard, right? So some of survivors have told me, like, that's what was hurtful. It wasn't that this person didn't call the police when they knew they were experiencing domestic violence or sexual assault. It's their response was blaming me for what happened. They weren't supportive. They thought I was now dirty, I shouldn't belong, that I'm bringing trouble into the church. And that, to me, is part of us learning about these issues and on being trauma-informed in every role. And our organization does provide those trainings. I'm pitching that if anyone is interested. Because that makes, like I said, language matters. How we respond by research, the first person a survivor tells has so much power whether they seek resources. And if that person is saying, this was your fault, you did something wrong, they're not going to tell anyone again or access those resources. So I did want to clarify that.
Very good. Okay, I think that this has been absolutely wonderful, and we can do a part 2, where we can consider the questions that are being asked, do some research, talk to, law enforcement, people who deal with these kinds of issues on a regular. But I think the thing that we have received tonight is that these these three people are at the top of their game. We've heard all of their individual, what they do on a daily basis. But one thing that I've heard is that they need the community in order to be most effective in their individual assignments, and that they need the church. You know, they need for us to respond. That is a very necessary component to bring that individual complete healing when we have the right tools, we're informed, and we know how to work with them as they do their job, we do ours, right? They can minister to the bodies, but we're going to take care of themselves and their spirits, right? So thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Again, I want to thank Lenny, Lo, Denise Adams, Beretta Francis, and all of the U.S. Attorney's Office for having this type of program for us to come together and talk. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to ask Pastor Stanley if he would come and close us out in prayer.
Good evening, everybody. How are you? Let us pray. Father, we thank you for all of the restoration that you bring to souls, O Lord. We pray, O Lord, that you will use all these resources, O God, to heal, Father God, to strengthen, O God, and to fortify, Father God, organizations, churches, families, O God, when this kind of trauma happens within our communities, Father. And we thank you for this opportunity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good night, guys. God bless. We will email you guys the video link so that you can share it with your congregation or your coworkers.